The final speaker in this session is Keith Fairbanks, who is a student at BYU, double majoring in classics and humanities. The topic of his paper is going to be the Eleusinian Mysteries, Greatest Conquest of Demetrios, Poliorketes. All right, here we go.
In 302 BC, Demetrios I of Macedon demanded initiation into the mysteries at Eleusia. He came at the wrong time of year for initiation into the lesser mysteries and wished to be indicted into both the lesser and greater portions of the rites. The Athenians promptly changed their calendar year twice to facilitate the Hellenistic monarch. Thus, the Macedonian partook of the great mysteries without infringing the holy law. This great honor, following a year's residence in the Parthenon itself, was perhaps the most significant in a series of honors granted to Demetrius by the Athenians while he held power. These honors, considered sacrilegious by many, were symbolic not of Athenian devotion toward Demetrius, but rather of Athenian and Greek submission to him. I shall here first present Demetrius and his character, and then the context in which these honors were given to him by the Athenians. I shall then discuss his residence in the Parthenon and his inclusion in the Eleusinian Mysteries, each in turn. Upon concluding that discussion, I shall turn to the symbolic dominance of Athens and indeed of the old Athenian Empire, which these actions represent. Demetrius I was the son of Antigonus of Macedon, one of the 5 kings who carved up Alexander's empire following his untimely death. The politics of that era of history can perhaps best be described with an anecdote from Plutarch. Once, upon returning from hunting and finding his father in discussion with embassies, Demetrius kissed him by way of greeting and then sat by his side, just as he was, javelins in hand. Antigonus made a point of this to the embassies, and Plutarch of it remarked, "So utterly unsociable a thing, it seems, is empire, and so full of ill will and distrust, that the oldest and greatest of the successors of Alexander could make it a thing to glory in that he was not afraid of his son, but allowed him near his person lance in hand." This was a very turbulent time, and the close relationship Demetrius apparently shared with his father was a subject of fascination, at least for his biographer. This story and several others which he related showed Demetrius to be always loyal, very capable, and licentious when the opportunity arose. Demetrius was a military genius. He applied his ingenuity to tactics and engineering almost exclusively. The remainder went to drinking and philandering. Plutarch lauded his military prowess, saying that he separated duty and pleasure entirely, and when he dedicated himself to duty, he was terribly formidable in preparations for war. Unlike those contemporary kings who turned their leisure to music or to painting, Demetrius spent his in the perfecting of warships and siege engines. Said Plutarch, "But with Demetrius even the work of his hands was kingly, and his method had grandeur about it, since what he produced displayed loftiness of purpose and spirit combined with elegance and ingenuity, so that the men thought it worthy not only to be designed and paid for by a king, but actually to be wrought by his hand." Indeed, his most impressive naval designs, his 15 and 16 banked flagships, and his massive siege towers, especially the famous Helepolis, were admired even by his enemies. These were the talents of the fiercely loyal son of Antigonus. When in his early 20s, he met sound defeat in his first command against Ptolemy and followed it closely with a rousing victory over Siles, Ptolemy's general. He liberated Athens from Cassander in 307, and in the following year defeated Ptolemy at Cyprus, succeeding against a 2-pronged assault by facing Menelaus's 60 ships with only 10 of his own and winning the day. He carried out a famous and magnificent siege of the great city of Rhodes against that city's enormous walls and tremendous naval power. This Demetrius was the sharpest and most deadly arrow in Antigonus's quiver, and he launched him at the world with spectacular results. Indeed, so much trust did he place in his son that as he faced overwhelming numbers and imminent death at Ipsus, Antigonus calmly said, "Demetrius will come to my aid." Demetrius was too late. It was before Ipsus, in the heyday of Antigonus's power, that Demetrius received so many honors at the hands of the Athenians. Plutarch lists the following. Both Demetrius and Antigonus received the titles of king and savior gods. Their figures were to be woven into the sacred robe of Athena with those of the other gods. An altar was consecrated to Demetrius. 2 new tribes were created in their honor. Envoys sent by public decree to either Antigonus or Demetrius should be sacred deputies instead of ambassadors. Demetrius should be received with the honors given to Demeter and Dionysus whenever he should arrive in the city. The month of Munichion was changed to Demetrion. An oracle was sought from Demetrius. These honors are made out by Plutarch to be extravagant and sacrilegious. He even lists the terrible portents which followed their bestowal. However, these honors were not so terrible compared to those given later. Upon his second liberation of Athens, Demetrius was given residence in the Parthenon. Plutarch did not describe his residence in the Holy Temple as a pious one. But Demetrius, who ought to have revered Athena, if for no other reason at least because she was his elder sister, for this was what he liked to have her called, filled the Acropolis with such wanton treatment of freeborn youth and native Athenian women that the place was then thought to be particularly pure when he shared his dissolute life there with Chrysis and Lamia and Demo and Anticyria, the well-known prostitutes. While this description certainly does not describe the honor due to a place of worship, it is important to note that the Parthenon was not a temple in the same sense that cathedrals and churches are today. In the words of Mary Beard, the Parthenon was a particularly grand treasury. The Parthenon was most importantly a resting place for the statue to the goddess Athena and a storehouse of offerings given to her. No religious ceremonies of which modern scholars can be certain took place within the temple. Sacrifices to the Greek gods took place on altars often outside their temples, but there is some debate as to whether the Parthenon ever had such an altar. In fact, Mary Beard also wrote, "The only ceremony ever to have taken place in the monument that we can document in any detail is no spectacular ritual from the glory days of the Athenian Empire in the 5th century BC. It is the inauguration of a Byzantine archbishop centuries into the Middle Ages." Understanding that the Parthenon was not a place for worshippers, it was still held to be quite sacred, and Demetrius's actions there were not looked upon kindly. His residence there is strange enough. Concerning the activities of the temple, one scholar wrote, "Rituals, as we have said, were mostly performed outside, not inside the temple. Indeed, it was quite rare for ordinary Greeks to be granted the right of entry to the temple, which was kept locked for a large part of the year." Tradition notwithstanding, Demetrius lived inside the temple with his sister Athena and a series of prostitutes, violating the virgin house. To add insult to injury, while living in the Parthenon, he demanded the procurement of 250 talents for his use, and only when the money had been collected did he reveal that it was to purchase soaps for the prostitutes with whom he desecrated Athena's house. Perhaps the most shocking of the honors given to Demetrius at this time was his initiation into the Eleusinian Mysteries. The mysteries were practiced at Eleusis starting as early as the late Helladic or Middle Mycenaean period, or about 1500 BC. Scott and Diodorus point to Crete as the possible origin of the mysteries. The mythic origin is the tale first told in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. In it, the goddess famously tells Metanera, "I am Demeter the honored, the greatest benefit and joy to undying gods and to mortals. But come now, let all the people build me a great temple, and beneath it an altar under the steep walls of the city, above Callicharon on the rising hill. I myself shall introduce rites, so that later you may propitiate my mind by their right performance." This temple has been excavated and is known as Megaron B. The rites practiced there were never to be revealed, and so little, if anything, is known about them which is not deduced archaeologically. However, they were divided into the lesser and greater mysteries, and the lesser rites, or the rites of purification, were performed more or less publicly. Thus, at least something can be read about them. The lesser mysteries were, according to Athenian tradition, begun for Heracles when he wished to be initiated. They took place at Agra, where there may have been a temple. They are often associated with the Chore, Persephone, and perhaps Demeter herself attended them as a guest. Initiants would have participated in fasting, sacrifices, sprinkling of water, and bathing in the Eleusos, singing and dancing.